Don't shoot. I'm not begging. I'm just done running. She didn't cry. That was the first thing he noticed. She was on her knees, bare hand in the snow, gasping for breath, with a shawl slipping off one shoulder and blood on her lip. But there were no tears. Just dirt on her face, windburn on her cheeks, and a stare that didn't blink. Cole Traver had seen plenty of people beg. This wasn't that. This was a choice. A girl barely grown, kneeling in front of a man holding a loaded rifle. And still, she didn't flinch. The snow fell harder around them. Her hair was wet, matted, some strands frozen stiff. She could barely keep her balance from running barefoot through the woods. He had her dead to rights. But then she spoke. "Please don't shoot," she said. "I'll give you strong children if you spare me." Colt's fingers tightened on the rifle. The barrel wavered, not from fear, but from the weight of her words. There was no tremble in her voice. It was calm, almost quiet, like she'd said it before, like she had known this moment would come and had already chosen how to survive it. He didn't speak, just stood there, snow crusting on his shoulders, eyes locked on a stranger who felt too real for how little he knew her. But let's go back. 3 days earlier, Colt had been riding west alone, as he had for 5 years. No wife, no homestead, just a horse, a scar under his ribs, and a rifle he cleaned more often than he ate. He wasn't the kind of man people waited for. He rode into towns and left before anyone could remember his name. He didn't ask for trouble, didn't stick around to see what followed him. He'd been tracking a buck through the pines when the sky turned fast and hard. The wind came sideways, ripping through the trees like it meant to tear skin. He found shelter under a limestone shelf and fed a small fire with pine resin and silence. The storm didn't let up. By morning, the woods had buried half the world in white, and the cold bit down like it was angry at the earth itself. Then something cracked. It wasn't clean like deer hooves. More broken, more human. Colt stood, rifle already in hand. He moved toward the sound, boots crunching frost, and stepped out just as she broke through the tree-line. At first, she looked like something wild, not scared, just used to running. Her skirt was ripped, her dress clung wet to her frame, and she had no coat. Her feet were bare, red and raw. When her eyes found his, they didn't widen. They just locked on. She slipped once, caught herself, and stopped 10 paces away, breathing like her lungs were giving out. Colt raised a rifle, not to shoot, just to show he could. That's when she whispered, "Please don't shoot." And then louder, "I'll give you strong children if you spare me." He didn't lower the gun. Not yet. Not because he wanted to shoot, but because she said it like it wasn't a plea, like it was a bargain. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She was calculating. He stared at her. The fire crackled behind him under the overhang. The storm had quieted some, but not enough. He looked her over, careful not to miss the bruises. Faint yellow on her collarbone, another on her arm. Not fresh, not old. The kind that told stories. "Where'd you come from?" he asked, voice low. She answered, "Nowhere worth going back to." He tilted the barrel of the rifle toward the fire. "It's warm." She hesitated, then walked toward him slowly, every step deliberate, like she was trying not to spook an animal. Once inside, she dropped to her knees by the fire and stretched her hands out. Her fingers were stiff, nails cracked and dirty. Colt sat across from her, rifle still across his lap. Neither of them spoke for a while. She didn't ask his name. He didn't ask hers. But after a long stretch of wind and silence, he said, "You always offer that when you think you're going to die?" She glanced at him sideways. "No." Pause. "But I figure it's what most men want." He frowned. "Children." She shook her head. "Someone who's scared enough to be worth sparing." He didn't reply. Just looked again, really looked. She wasn't broken. Just tired. So damn tired. "They sent 3 men after me," she said. "But only one followed this far." He didn't ask who. Not yet. But the grip on his rifle tightened. "You running from someone?" She didn't look at him. Just into the fire. People who don't like when property walks off. He didn't speak. Not for a while. But she knew he understood. She handed back his canteen after a long sip. "You gonna turn me in?" she asked. Colt didn't answer that directly. Instead, he said, "What's your name?" She looked at him. Quiet. Then answered, "Mira." He nodded. Finally lowered the rifle all the way. That night, The storm kept screaming outside, but under the limestone, the fire stayed alive. So did they. Colt knew two things already. First, Mira wasn't lying. Second, if he helped her, he'd make enemies. The kind of enemies who didn't wear bandanas, but badges. The kind who smiled when they put a bullet in your back. The kind that called themselves good men. And he wasn't sure yet if he wanted to be a bad one. By the time the second morning came, the snow had softened. Cold but calm. Colt sat near the fire, sharpening his knife, glancing at Mira now and then. She was curled beneath the buffalo hide, still asleep, her lashes frosted with cold. He thought about what he should do. He could take her to Red Elk Ridge, turn her in, and let the sheriff decide. There wasn't a bounty, not officially, but he knew how that town worked. He'd get quiet thanks, nods from the right people. The kind of men who shook hands hard and kept their boots clean while others bled. Colt had ridden with men like that. Men who believed land and money made the rules. But something in his gut twisted at the thought. Later that day, Mira asked if she could help dress the deer he'd shot before the storm. He didn't answer at first, just watched as she picked up the knife without waiting for permission. Her hands didn't tremble. She didn't flinch when the blood spilled. She worked like someone used to cleaning up after pain. He offered her a piece of jerky when they were done salting the meat. She took it slowly, chewed like she hadn't eaten in days. Then she said, "Tilson's boys used to say the only thing I was good for was laying quiet and not talking back." Colt didn't answer, just stared into the fire. Her voice was calm, like she wasn't telling a story, just a fact. "The first thing I remember," she added, "was being told who'd own me." He looked up. Her face was blank. Not angry, not sad, just tired. He didn't ask more. Not yet. But something inside him changed. A kind of slow burn. Not at her, but at the world. A world where someone like Mira could be passed around like furniture and nobody blinked. A world where men like Tilson had churches and girls like her had scars. That night, they shared the hide under the rock shelf again. Mira didn't say much, but Colt saw her watching him when she thought he was asleep. Not with fear. Not with hope either. Just watching. Measuring. Like she was trying to figure out how long before he changed his mind. The next morning, they broke camp. The sun was low, the cold still biting. Red Elk Ridge was only 5 miles east. If Colt turned now, he could take her in and be done. Clean hands, quiet conscience. Maybe even a warm meal from the sheriff's table. But when the ford came, he didn't go east. He turned west. Mira didn't say anything at first. They rode for nearly an hour without a word between them. Then, at a creek bed, she pulled her horse to a stop and looked at him. "You're not taking me to them." He nodded. "No." "Why?" He didn't answer right away, just adjusted the saddle strap, then looked back at her. "Because I've seen what men do when no one tells them no." She studied him. "You think they'll stop looking?" "No." "You think I'm worth dying over?" He shook his head. "You're worth not dying over." She frowned. "What does that mean?" He took a breath. "It means I've spent most of my life doing what I was told. Guarding stagecoaches. Hauling things for rich men. Never asked questions. Never looked too close. I just rode where the pay was." He looked at her now, serious. "You're the first thing I've carried that felt like it mattered." She didn't speak for a long time. Then she looked away and whispered something soft, too soft for most men to catch. "Thank you." He didn't reply. Didn't need to. They rode until dusk. Set up camp near a ravine, far from roads, far from town. Colt cleaned his rifle slower that night. Mira built a windbreak from sharp sticks and quiet patience. They didn't speak about Red Elk Ridge. They didn't talk about Tilson. But both of them knew the past wasn't done chasing her. Because men like Tilson didn't let things go. Especially not when they were proven wrong. Especially not when their property ran. The first sign came just after sunrise. Colt went to fill his canteen near a stream a half-mile from camp. That's when he saw the tracks, 3 sets of fresh horse prints. Deep, clean, not wild, not wandering. Written hard. They were close. Too close. He crouched by the stream, eyes on the trail. The tracks looped north, like they'd turned after catching a scent. He knew who they were. Tilson's boys. The kind of men who laughed when they hurt you. One of them used to hum a little tune before pulling the trigger. Colt remembered that tune like a bad dream. He ran back uphill fast. His boots crunched the frost and snapped twigs underfoot. When he reached camp, Mira was still working, sharpening more sticks like she already knew something was coming. "We have to move," he said. She looked up quick, calm but alert. "How many?" "3. Tilson's." She didn't cry, didn't shake, but her hands tightened on the stick until her knuckles went white. They packed fast. No fire, no trace, only what they could carry. Colt looked at her once before mounting his horse. "You ever been hunted before?" She climbed up, met his eyes. "I've been owned," she said. "That's worse." They rode hard, fast, no talking, just hooves and wind and the fear behind them. And somewhere in the trees, something followed. By the time the sun started to drop behind the hills, they found an old stone quarry. It was deep, maybe 60 feet down, and quiet like the earth had forgotten it. The walls were steep, but one narrow path zigzagged down into the pit. Colt studied it carefully. Not a perfect place, but better than the open. He tied off the horses behind a big boulder and helped Mira climb down first. The floor was rocky, but safe from the wind. One side of the quarry had an old cave held up by broken wooden beams. It wasn't much, but it gave them cover. "We'll stay here," he said. "If they're tracking us, they'll think twice before dropping in." Mira nodded. She didn't ask questions, just knelt and started building a small windbreak again. No fire this time, no light to give them away. "What if they don't hesitate?" she asked softly. Colt loaded his rifle with slow hands. "Then I shoot first." She didn't smile at the joke. He hadn't meant it to be funny. That night, they didn't sleep much. Just wrapped themselves in blankets, listening. The stone walls made every sound echo. A cough, a footstep, even the wind sliding through cracks. Colt sat with his rifle across his knees, eyes wide in the dark. And then it came. A sound, low and slow. A whistle. The same tune Colt remembered from Kansas City. The one Tilson's man used to hum before drawing blood. His heart dropped like a stone in his chest. Mira froze. "They're here," she whispered. He nodded once, already moving. The echoes made it hard to count, but the voices confirmed it. 3 of them, talking low, confident, like they thought it was already over. One of them called out, "Colt Traver, we heard you took something that don't belong to you." Colt didn't answer. "You know how this works?" another voice said. "That girl ran. Tilson paid good. She don't get a run." Silence. Then came the same voice, friendlier this time, too friendly. "Look, we ain't monsters. Hand her over. No blood. We'll even tell Tilson you put up a fight. Make you look good." Colt didn't move, but beside him, Mira stepped forward. Not much, just a few feet. He reached out, stopped her. "Don't." She looked at him. "If I go back, they'll kill me slow." A laugh came from the quarry rim. "That's the plan, darling." Then Mira raised her voice, strong and sharp. "Then come and take me." Colt cursed under his breath. "They're trying to pull us out into the open," he hissed. "Back up." But she didn't move. The first shot rang out. It slammed into the stone above her shoulder, spraying dust and rock chips. She didn't scream, didn't duck, just turned to Colt and said, "If I fall, don't shoot to wound. Finish it." His teeth clenched. "You're not falling." The shadows appeared at the top of the quarry. 3 figures, rifles raised, coming in like wolves. Colt took a breath, lined up his rifle, and fired. The first man dropped without a sound. The second fired back fast. A bullet tore past Colt's cheek, slicing the skin. Blood ran hot down his neck. Mira finally ducked, but not in fear. She reached for the fallen man's revolver. Her hand shook only slightly as she lifted it. She had never held a gun, but she aimed like she meant it. The third man stopped, just for a second, maybe shocked to see her armed, maybe shocked she was still standing. Colt fired again. His second shot hit the third man in the chest. The body dropped hard. Only one was left now, the whistler. But when they looked up again, he was gone, back over the ridge, vanished into the dark. Colt stayed still, breathing heavy. His cheek burned, blood still dripping. Mira dropped the revolver and ran to him, grabbed a rag, pressed it to the cut. They didn't speak. The quarry was silent again, the kind of silence that settles after something final, the kind that means no one's going back. The moon came up slow, lighting the stone floor in soft silver. Colt sat with his back against the wall, pain dull but steady. Mira sat beside him, cleaning the wound with careful fingers. She didn't cry, didn't panic, just worked like someone who'd learned long ago how to fix what could be fixed. You could have run, Colt said finally. She looked at him, eyes steady. I did. For years. He nodded slowly, then added, that night I saw you in the snow, when you said that about children. Did you think I might shoot you? I hoped you would, she said. That stopped him. She took a breath. Because if you shot me, it would have been quick. Clean. Better than what I ran from. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't looking for pity. She was just tired of hiding the truth. I was passed around since I was 12. Men like Tilson, they don't see girls. They see things. Things to use. Things to sell. Children, silence, service. That's all they want. Colt clenched his jaw. His voice came low. I was raised on a ranch. My ma would have tanned my hide if I ever looked at a living thing like it owed me something just 'cause I fed it. Mira gave a soft laugh. Not happy, just surprised. She sounds like someone I'd have liked. She'd have liked you too, Colt said. You speak plain. Mira leaned back against the stone wall, looked up at the sky. You really would have taken me to the sheriff that day, she said. If I hadn't spoken first. He didn't answer. She smiled a little, dry and sad. That offer, the one about children, it wasn't real. I just thought maybe it would make me useful enough to live. Colt looked at her then. You were worth sparing, because you're you, not because of what you could give someone. She held his gaze. Her voice dropped low. You're the first man who ever said something like that, without expecting something back. He shrugged. I'm not a good man. No, she said, but you're a decent one. Mira didn't move for a long time. She just sat there beside him, her back against the wall, hands folded, eyes on the sky. It was the first quiet that didn't feel dangerous. The kind of quiet that comes after surviving something awful. Not peace, just a pause. A moment to breathe. She turned her head slightly. Do you believe in second lives? Colt looked over. What do you mean? Not after death. Just the same body, same world. But new name. A life where you're not what they called you before. He didn't answer right away. He looked up at the stars instead, blinking through the pain. The blood had dried along his cheek now. It itched, but he didn't touch it. I think that's the only thing worth believing in, he finally said. Mira smiled just a little. Then she leaned her head on his shoulder. Gently, like she didn't want to scare him. He didn't move. He let her stay there. Not as a prize. Not as a promise. Just as someone who had seen too much and still chose to sit next to him. A girl who had every reason to run, but stayed because for once, someone didn't ask her to give more than she had. She whispered, I don't know who I am without the running. Colt glanced down at her. You'll figure it out. Ow! He tilted his head toward the sky again. You start by walking, and you don't look back. She reached for his hand. Not like a lover. Not like someone needing to be saved. Just someone holding on. To him, maybe, but more likely to the quiet. The stillness. The idea that maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. The next morning, Mira woke first. She made coffee without a word, using the small tin Colt kept in his saddlebag. She watched the sun rise over the quarry edge, warm light spilling across her face. She didn't look hunted anymore, just tired in a normal way, like someone who had worked hard and finally sat down. When Colt stirred, she handed him the cup. He took it with a grunt and a half smile. You're up early, he said. Didn't sleep much. Me neither. They didn't talk about the night before. Not the gunfight. Not the men. Not the fact that one of them had gotten away. They both knew that danger wasn't gone. It had just stepped back for a while. After packing, they rode west again. Not because it was safe, but because it was the only direction that didn't feel like going back. They rode past creeks and brush, through dry woods and broken hills. The snow was melting now. Spring would come soon. Colt knew a place. Far west, near the old edge of Comanche land, there was a stretch of ground soft with grass and quiet with trees. No town, no law, just space. The kind of place where people went to be forgotten or to remember who they used to be. That's where they headed. They reached it a week later. It wasn't much, a narrow stream, a patch of trees, soft earth, and enough sky to make a man feel small. Colt looked around and nodded once. This'll do. They built the cabin by hand. Mira helped lay the logs. She shaped clay into cups, fired them in the hot coals. Colt planted beans and swore when frost hit them too soon. They argued about how to salt meat. They laughed when the roof leaked during the first rain. They fixed it with tar and prayer. Some nights they didn't speak at all, just sat beside the fire and let it crackle. Colt never touched her without asking. Mira never asked permission to speak her mind. And somehow, in those two quiet rules, they built something real, stronger than paper, stronger than church words. There were no rings, no vows, no preacher to bless it. But Mira buried her old name behind the cabin, and Colt never once called her anything but Mira. A year passed, then another. They didn't have children. It didn't seem to matter. Instead, Mira taught two orphan girls from a passing wagon how to weave cord strong enough to pull a calf out of the mud. Colt built a bridge across the creek, just wide enough for wagons, so no one had to drown a mule trying to cross. Their names weren't known. Their story wasn't told in town halls. But something changed in them both. The quiet stopped sounding like fear. It started sounding like freedom. One morning, Colt was out by the fence line, fixing a post the wind had knocked down. He heard hooves behind him, turned slowly. Just one rider, young, dusty, polite, said he was heading east, looking for work. Colt offered water. Mira brought bread and a narrow eye. Before the boy left, he looked around. "This your place?" he asked. Colt nodded. The boy tipped his hat, smiling. Lucky man. Colt looked back at the porch, where Mira was already turning inside, apron fluttering in the breeze like a flag. He smiled. "Yeah," he said. "I am." It was late spring when Colt noticed the birds nesting again in the trees near the cabin. Every year, they returned like clockwork. But this time, something felt different. That morning, Mira had been quiet. She stood at the edge of the porch, one hand resting lightly on her stomach. Colt saw the look in her eyes, far away, as if she was listening to something he couldn't hear. He stepped outside, wiping dirt from his hands. "You all right?" She looked at him slowly, and then gave a half-smile. I think something's changing in me." He raised an eyebrow, not sure what she meant at first. Then she reached for his hand, placed it gently over her belly, and waited. Nothing moved under his palm, not yet. But the warmth there, the stillness, he felt it. Or maybe he only imagined it. Still, he believed her. Colt didn't speak. Not right away. His chest felt tight. Not from fear, but from something bigger. He'd never had a family. Not really. Not one that stayed. He looked into her eyes. "You're sure?" She nodded. And for a long moment, they just stood like that. No wild joy. No loud shouting. Just the quiet understanding between two people who had lived through too much to take anything for granted. That night, he sat beside the fire, staring into the flames. Mira rested with her head on his lap, breathing soft and steady. "Do you think," she said, eyes half closed, "the child will grow up safe here?" He didn't answer for a moment. Then, not safe in the world, but maybe safe from what we were. She nodded. "I want that." Weeks passed. They made a cradle. Simple, sturdy. Mira carved birds into the wood. She said it would help the baby sleep. Colt made extra repairs to the roof, sealed the windows, res-tacked the firewood twice. He was ready, or so he thought, because one evening, Mira didn't come in from the creek. Colt found her kneeling by the water, pale, one hand gripping her side. Her face was tight with pain. "It's early," she whispered. "Too early." He carried her back, heart hammering like thunder. He laid her on the bed and tried to calm her, but the pain only grew. She bled. "Too much. I'm scared," she whispered, gripping his hand. "I'm right here," he said, brushing the hair from her forehead. "You stay with me, Mira. You hear me? Stay." But she didn't respond. Her eyes fluttered. She was fading fast. Colt had seen death before. But this was different. This was something that clawed at his chest, that made his throat close and his vision blur. He pressed his forehead to hers. "Please," he whispered, the same way she had once whispered to him in the snow. "Please don't leave." She blinked slowly, and then, like a miracle, she breathed deeper. The bleeding stopped. The pain eased. Not all at once, but enough to give hope. Enough to keep her alive through the night. At sunrise, Colt was still sitting beside her, holding her hand like it was the only thing keeping the world together. She opened her eyes. weak but alive. I'm sorry, she said softly. He shook his head. No, don't. I couldn't save the baby. He said nothing. She turned her face away, and tears slipped down her cheeks. I wanted them to be strong. Like I said that day. I thought maybe it would fix me, make me whole. Colt leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. You were already whole. They would have been lucky to be yours. For days, the house was quiet. No music, no laughter, just healing. The cradle sat by the wall, empty. Colt didn't move it. Neither did Mira. Then one afternoon, she stood and walked outside. Slowly, step by step. She sat on the porch, watched the trees sway. Colt joined her. They didn't speak. Just sat there as the wind moved through the grass and the birds flew low across the creek. I think I'll teach again, she said finally. He looked at her. She gave a small smile. Those 2 girls that came through, they weren't the only ones. Others will come. Orphans. Lost ones. If I can't be a mother the way I thought, maybe I can be something else. Colt reached over and held her hand. She squeezed his back. That evening, she opened the cabin door and placed the empty cradle outside under the tree. She didn't burn it. She didn't bury it. She just left it there, like a marker, a quiet place for grief and memory. And then, she lit a candle in the window, not for mourning, for welcome. People began to find them, not in large numbers, not all at once, but slowly, quietly, like seeds carried on the wind. A broken cart, a fevered child, a woman with bruises and nowhere to go. Word had traveled somehow, about a cabin deep in the hills where the fire never died, where the door was never locked. Colt didn't ask questions when they arrived. He just handed out bread, patched roofs, mended fences. Mira made room where there was none. She boiled herbs, washed wounds, listened more than she spoke. One day a boy came, barely 10, covered in dust. Wouldn't say a word. Colt gave him water. Mira sat beside him on the porch for hours, saying nothing, just peeling apples and dropping slices into his hand. By sunset, he whispered, "My name's Caleb," and just like that, he became theirs. No papers, no ceremony, just a place at the table and his own blanket by the fire. Colt built a second room onto the cabin, then a third. Mira turned part of the garden into a schoolyard. She drew letters in the dirt with a stick and taught the children to read by lamplight. The cabin was never empty again. Sometimes, when Colt sat by the creek in the evenings, he'd watch them. Caleb chasing frogs, a little girl learning to braid Mira's hair, others laughing as they drew chalk figures on flat rocks. He still had his rifle, still kept a lookout, because peace, he knew, was a fragile thing, and history had long arms. It reached them one late summer day. A letter arrived, folded inside a saddlebag tied to a traveler's mule. The man who brought it didn't know who had written it, only that it was left with his father's old papers before he died, and he was told to deliver it to a man named Colt who lives where the map turns white. Colt opened it alone. The handwriting was rough. The ink faded, but he recognized the name at the bottom. Jareth Tilson. The letter was short, measured. No threats, no anger. It said, "I don't know if you lived, but if you did, I imagine you're far from men like me now. I won't come for her. I gave up the chase. Some things, even men like me can't outrun. I lost more than I took. Let her go, if you haven't already. If you have, I hope she's free in the way I never let her be." Colt stared at the letter for a long time. Then he burned it. He didn't tell Mira right away. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he didn't want that name inside her peace. Not anymore. Not now. But she knew something had shifted. That night, while they sat on the porch and listened to the crickets hum, she looked at him. Was it someone from before? He nodded. She reached over, took his hand. "You don't have to carry it alone." He squeezed her fingers gently. "It's not mine to carry anymore." The next morning, they planted a new tree by the stream. Mira called it the forgetting tree. Not to erase the past, but to mark the place where it stopped owning them. Seasons passed. Caleb grew tall, strong. He started chopping wood like Colt, whistled as he worked, even fell in love with a shy girl from a trading wagon. Mira braided her hair with little feathers, said it brought protection. One night, Colt sat by the fire and looked around the room. Mira was sewing. Caleb was carving something for the younger children. The girl, her name was Ada, was painting the cradle that still sat by the wall. It had never been used for a baby, but had held dreams, and now it held hope. Colt leaned back in his chair, rubbed his hand across the scar that still sat just under his collarbone. He remembered blood. He remembered snow. He remembered a girl in a sack, begging for mercy. And now she was humming. Not because she forgot, but because she had survived. That winter came harder than the others. The snow started early, and the wind howled louder through the hills. Food grew tighter. The creek froze, then cracked, then froze again. But inside the cabin, warmth held steady. Firelight, children's laughter, the smell of stew. These are the things that kept people alive. Mira had begun teaching not just letters now, but stories. Real ones. Her own. She didn't hide her scars anymore. She didn't flinch when names were mentioned. One afternoon, as the children sat cross-legged in a circle, she told them, there was once a girl who thought giving herself away would keep her alive. But one day, she stopped begging, and someone, just one man, chose not to take. The children looked up at her, wide-eyed. What happened to the girl? One of them asked. Mira smiled gently. She learned to build, to teach, and to stay. Outside the cabin, Colt had heard every word through the open window. He didn't walk in. He didn't need to. That night, he reached for her hand in bed. I don't say it enough, he murmured. She turned toward him. Say what? That I'm still here because of you. She rested her forehead against his. Then say it just once more, so I can carry it for the bad days. So he did. He said like a prayer, like a man who had bled too much to waste words now. But peace never lasts untouched. It came again one sharp morning, when the snow still hadn't melted and the barn door creaked open with ice. A rider, alone, wrapped in a black coat. No badge, no company. But his horse was lean and marked, the kind of mount trained to chase. Colt stepped out with his rifle slung low, not raised, but ready. The man didn't draw. He just nodded once. I heard there's a woman here who used to belong to a name that's now buried in Texas. Colt's eyes didn't blink. She belongs to no one. The man didn't argue. He just reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather book. Held out flat. It's hers. Found it in a marshal's wagon after an ambush near El Paso. Thought it might matter. Colt took it without a word. The man turned to leave. Before he rode off, he called back. She's not hunted anymore. Names fade. Trails go cold. You both got lucky. Then he was gone. Colt stood there long, while before heading inside. He found Mira sitting by the fire, her needle paused in thread. He handed her the book. She opened it slowly. Inside were torn pages, sketches of birds, pressed flowers, and one small drawing of a cabin by a stream, done in childlike pencil. Her old handwriting covered the margins. Thoughts, fears, prayers. She stared at it as if it were a ghost. Then she closed the book and held it to her chest. What did he say? She asked quietly. Colt replied. He said names fade. She nodded, tears silently sliding down her cheeks. That night, after the others had gone to sleep, Mira stepped outside into the snow. She lit a single candle and placed it on a wooden stump by the forgetting tree. Then she whispered something the wind carried away. Not goodbye, not regret, just a soft, final letting go. When she came back in, she crawled under the blanket beside Colt and rested her head on his shoulder. I think, she said softly, I'm finally free. He kissed her temple. You always were. Spring returned, but it came slower that year. The snow melted with more hesitation, as if the hills were afraid to loosen their grip. Yet the earth softened eventually, and the river sang again. The cabin stood a little older, a little stronger. Its walls held stories now. Not whispered secrets, but memories spoken aloud, lessons passed on. Colt watched the sunrise more often these days. He rose early, not because of habit or fear, but because peace had finally taught him how to greet the day without checking over his shoulder. Mira sat beside him most mornings, wrapped in a wool shawl. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they just listened to the birds. She had started writing again. Not letters, not warnings, but a journal. Pages full of little details. What the sky looked like before a storm, what Ada's laughter sounded like in the garden. How Caleb had once cried over a broken toy, then spent 3 hours fixing it with string and glue. "This is the life I almost missed," she wrote. One afternoon, Caleb came to Colt in the shed. He held out a box. "What's this?" Colt asked. "My tools. I'm leaving in spring." "Me and Ada." Colt looked at the boy who wasn't a boy anymore. His shoulders were broader now, his voice more sure. "We want to build our own place. Just down the creek, maybe. Close enough to visit, far enough to grow." Colt didn't argue. He only nodded once, like a father would. Later that night, he told Mira. She didn't cry. "They're ready," she said simply. "You think they'll make it?" "They will," she smiled. "Because we did." That summer, they helped build the new home. Others joined. New hands, new stories, new hearts. The cabin became a village. The school grew into a room with benches and chalkboards. The garden stretched beyond the fence. And the cradle? They filled it with letters. Not from pain, but from healing. Children wrote their wishes and folded them into scraps of cloth and paper. Dreams of being dancers, healers, builders. Hopes for their mothers, for the stars, for the sun to always rise. One day, Mira stood before a small group of girls under the willow tree. She held the worn leather book in her hand, her old book. "I used to think surviving was enough," she said. "That if I just kept breathing, that was victory." She paused, eyes meeting theirs. But survival is not the same as living. Surviving is what you do when you're still chained. Living is what happens when you break the lock. One girl raised her hand. "What if we're still scared?" Mira walked over and kneeled in front of her. "Then you're already braver than most." That night, Colt and Mira lay under the open sky. No roof above, just stars. "Do you ever wish we'd done things differently?" she asked. Colt thought for a moment. "No," he said. "If I had pulled that trigger that day, I wouldn't have known what it means to love something more than your past." She reached for his hand. The wind carried the sounds of laughter from the houses beyond. For once, the world felt still. And the lesson, so simple it hurt, was this. Sometimes the strongest children we give the world are the lives we build after choosing not to destroy.